Hey y'all, it's Robert, and in today's video, I'll be making the Pumpkin King of Halloween, and that's Jack Skellington. And I already know just starting this cake off what's going to be the most difficult part, and that's trying to figure out the structure of this cake, because I have to find a way to support this character's head so that I can get this cake as close as I can to the character design. So before I can even begin working on this cake, I have to make sure that I have the structure right. So I'm using a threaded rod and a wooden board, and I'm making sure that this is all secure before I begin stacking the cake. I'm also covering the threaded rod with aluminum tape to make sure that this is all food safe. For the cake layers, I'm using Halloween confetti cake, and I bake these in sheet pans so I can cut these to the sizes that I need. Now I'm adding simple syrup to each of the cakes because I am going to be carving this cake, so I want to make sure that it doesn't dry out as I'm working on it. I'm stacking the cake layers with vanilla buttercream, but because I'm making this cake so tall, I have to add a little more support, so I'm going to be adding some cake dowels. For the cake dowels, I'm going to cut these all the same exact length, and for this design, I only need to use 4, and I'm going to insert those into the cake and then add a cake board on top before I continue to stack the cake. Now that I have the cake all stacked up, I'm now going to start carving it, and I'm using a serrated knife to do this. And then I also made this template with a Cricut, and I did this just so I can get the general shape of what this cake would look like. Now the cake is all carved, so I'm now going to add a crumb coat, and this is just to make sure that those crumbs stay in place before I add the ganache. For the ganache, I'm using a 3-to-1 ratio of chocolate to cream, and I find that this ratio works the best whenever I'm making any kind of sculpted cake. So I'm just going to combine the chocolate and cream until it's all smooth, and then I'm just going to cover this up and let it sit. Now to add this ganache to the cake, I'm adding some to a piping bag because I find it easier to add it to the cake this way. And then I'm going to smooth this all out with an offset spatula and a cake comb, and then I'm going to go back with an acetate sheet to curve the edges. While the ganache is sitting on the torso, I can now start working on Jack Skellington's head. And this is the part of the cake that I knew would be a little bit tricky. So I'm going to be using styrofoam for this part, and this is going to be a really sturdy base so that the head does not fall over as I'm working on it. I'm adding a cake board to the styrofoam and then covering that with plastic wrap just to make sure that none of it gets on the cake, and then I can finish working on the head. So the base of the cakes are now all done and the ganache is set, so I can now start adding the modeling chocolate to it. Because the cake is so large, I'm adding the modeling chocolate in pieces, and I'm going to steam the ganache first just to make sure that the modeling chocolate sticks to it. Covering the head of this cake is really difficult because of the shape of it, so I'm having to add the modeling chocolate in multiple pieces, and then I'm using modeling tools to blend all these pieces together. So the rest of the rod that you can see right now is actually going to be Jack Skellington's neck. So I'm going to be covering it with piping gel so I can make sure that this modeling chocolate sticks to it, and then I'm just going to shape it until I get it just right. To detail the jacket that he wears, I'm going to be adding more modeling chocolate to make the lapel and the collar. Now here's the fun but a little stressful part, and that's making sure that this cake looks like Jack by working on his face. So I'm going to be using modeling chocolate for this, and at first I thought I wanted this to look like a happy Jack, so I used circle cutters to mark the eyes, but then I decided for Halloween I want this to look a little more sinister, so I went back and then I changed it to look a little more menacing. With modeling tools, I'm marking where his mouth is and then going back and adding all those details to his smile. So this cake is all modeled and now it's time to add the color, but all I need for this cake is black and white. I'm diluting this paint to get it to a consistency that's easy to paint with, but I wanted to figure out a way that would be easy to make these pinstripes, so I'm using these ribbons and then placing these on the cake before I paint the cake black. I thought this would be an easier way to get the pinstripes on this cake because it's going to be really hard trying to paint white paint on top of black, but I really don't like the way it came out. I think the lines came out a little too clean for the character design, so I did go back and try to mess up the edges a little bit. Now to detail Jack's face, I'm going to be painting in his eyes, nose, and mouth with black paint. The modeling chocolate is a little off-white, so I'm going to be painting his head and torso with white paint to get it closer to the character design. Now that the black paint on the lapel and collar has dried, I'm going to go over that with white paint to hand draw in these pinstripes, and I really like the way that this looks. The cake is almost done, but I have to add this key detail to the character, and that's the bow tie. Because of how large the bow tie is, I'm actually going to be making this with gum paste because I really need this to hold its shape when I place it onto the cake. I'm rolling out the gum paste and then using a template to cut out the bow tie shape, and then I'm just going to let this rest so that it hardens, and then I can place it on the front of the cake. Before I place it onto the cake, I'm going to paint it first because it's going to be a lot easier to do it this way. And then I'm just going to add some toothpicks and piping gel to the back of the bow tie, and this will help it stick to the cake. And the last detail to add is the button on the front of the jacket. So here it is. This is the Jack Skellington Cake complete. Hey y'all, it's Robert, and in today's video, I'm going to be making a pretty unique cake. So I want to make a cake that glows in the dark for Halloween, and I also want to put a twist to the cartoon cake trend. So for a regular cartoon cake, you would outline everything with black, but I'm doing the complete opposite, and I'm making a black cake and then outlining everything with bright colors. And I have this neon petal dust that should glow underneath the black light, so I'm hoping that this all works out. I'm starting this off by leveling and torting 6 and 8-inch cakes. I decided to make each color a different flavor, so the lime green color is lime flavored, the pink is strawberry, and the black is chocolate. And I don't really know how all 3 of those flavors work together, but I'm hoping it tastes good. After all the cakes are torted, I'm then adding simple syrup to each one, just to make sure that they stay moist. Because this cake already has so many different flavors, I decided to stack the cake with vanilla buttercream. Once the cakes are stacked, I'm then trimming down the sides of the cake a little with a serrated knife, and once they're all trimmed, I'm then adding the crumb coat. I'm using chocolate ganache for the final coat, and to make it match the color scheme of this cake, I'm going to be coloring it black. I'm using 6 cups of chocolate chips and 2 cups of cream, and I'm mixing this all together until it's smooth, and then I'm adding the black gel food coloring. While the ganache is cooling, I'm covering 2 cake boards that I'll be using as guides with cling wrap, and the cling wrap will make peeling these off the cake really easy, so it's a very important step. Now I can add the ganache to the cake, and I'm smoothing this out with the cake comb. So the base of both cakes are done, so it's time to start decorating them. Both tiers are being covered in black fondant, and I'm using the paneling method to do this. I'm adding black fondant to the top of the cake and cutting off the excess, then I'm wrapping the sides of the cake with more black fondant. Because this is a tiered cake, I need to make sure that I add support, so I'm cutting 4 dowels all the same size and then inserting those into the bottom tier. Before I stack them, I'm flipping the cakes upside down and adding a strip of black fondant around them, and this strip will be used to make the drip in the design. Now I can carefully stack the cake and begin working on the details. I'm using a modeling tool to mark the drip and then going back with a knife to cut through the fondant. To bring in some Halloween elements, I'm using a ghost mold with black fondant, and I'm adding these around the bottom tier. Next, I'm rolling fondant into a log to make the candles, and I'm placing these on top, and I'm holding these in place with a toothpick, and then I'm adding the flames on top of those. So the cake is all black, and I think this actually looks really cool, but now it's time to start bringing in the color. I'm using white fondant, and I'm coloring it lime green, pink, and orange. To make the piping, I'm using a fondant extruder, and I'll be using a drill with an attachment, and this is going to help me make the piping so much faster. First, I'm outlining the drips in the top of the cakes with pink fondant. Then the bottom of the cake is being outlined with lime green, and I'm also adding more markings around the cake, and this is just to add more color to it. Each of the ghosts are also being outlined with a different color to find it. And with orange fondant, I'm adding the reflection detail to the drips on the cake. Now I'm outlining the candles with yellow and the flames with orange. And the last piping to add is the word boo in orange fondant, and I'm doing this on both sides of the cake. So all the color is now on the cake, so now I'm going to paint the piping, and this is what should make it glow in the dark. I'm mixing the petal dust with vodka, and I'm carefully painting this on the cake. I'm being really careful when doing this because you might not see any mistakes with the lights on, but if there's any mistakes, they would glow underneath the black light, and I really don't want that to happen. Now it's time to see if it glows. So all I have to do is set up the black lights, turn the regular lights off, and then just hope that this effect works. So here it is. This is the neon sign Halloween cake complete. Hey y'all, it's Robert, and in today's video, I'll be showing you how to make a Chucky cake from the movie Child's Play. And this cake is going to be a little complicated because of all the facial features I have to get just right in order for this cake to look as close as I can get it to the character. For this cake, I'm going to need really good support to make sure that it doesn't fall over and everything will stay secure. So I'm using a threaded rod with a wooden cake board, and I'm going to cover that rod with aluminum tape just to make sure that it's all food safe. For the cake layers, I'm using confetti sheet cakes, and I'm also using 6-inch cake layers for the head, and I'm going to torte these and then add simple syrup to each one because I will be carving this cake, so I don't want it to dry out as I'm working on it. I'm stacking the cake with vanilla buttercream, and because of how I'm structuring this cake, I'm also going to add some cake dowels, so I'm cutting those all the same size, and then I'm adding a cake board on top of that before I continue to stack the cake. Now that the cake is all stacked up, I can now start carving it. So I'm using a serrated knife to do this. And I'm looking at a picture of Chucky and I'm just eyeing this, trying to get it as close as I can to the shape of this character. Now I'm going to be adding a crumb coat to this cake, and I just want to make sure that I don't get any crumbs into the final coat. And of course, I'm going to be covering this cake with chocolate ganache. For the ganache, I'm using a 3-to-1 ratio of chocolate to cream, and I find that this ratio works best whenever I'm covering a cake with fondant or modeling chocolate. So I'm combining the cream and the chocolate, mixing that together until it's smooth, then I'm going to cover it and let it set before I add it to the cake. I'm adding the ganache to the cake with a piping bag. It's just a lot easier to apply it to the cake this way. Then I'm going to completely cover it by using an offset spatula and then using an acetate sheet to really smooth this out because I need a really smooth surface before I add the modeling chocolate. I like to use white modeling chocolate whenever I'm making a sculpted cake. I just find it to be a lot easier to work on all the details without having to worry about mixing colors up, and then I can just add the color at a later point. So I'm going to roll out the modeling chocolate and then completely cover this cake. But before I do that, I have to steam the ganache first because I want to make sure that this modeling chocolate sticks to it. Then I can cover the cake, and I'm just going to completely cover it with a smooth base before I begin to build upon it. Now I can start adding some details, so I'm adding some of the facial features first by adding his nose and his eyebrows and eyes, and then also his mouth. And I'm doing this by adding modeling chocolate and using sculpting tools to get this as close as I can to the character. I'm also adding more modeling chocolate to fill out his face by adding cheeks and the folds around his mouth. For the overalls, I'm creating these by using sculpting tools, so I'm actually not adding more modeling chocolate, I'm just creating those indentations and then defining it out. I'm also creating details to the shirt by creating markings where the seams would be and then also around the neck of the shirt. And to really detail the overalls, I'm creating the markings by using a stitching wheel tool. Now it's time to make Chucky look really scary, so I'm going to start adding the scarring onto his face. To make the scars, I'm using a modeling tool to create the indentations, and I'm looking at a picture of Chucky trying to get these markings as close as I can to this character. Now it's time to make his hair, and I saved this part for last because I already knew that this was going to be really tough to make. I've never had to make hair before, so I just added modeling chocolate on top of it and then began to build onto it. And then I used modeling tools to create indentations where it looks like hair strokes. And I think I got it pretty good. This is the first time that I had to create hair, so I just know that I'll get better at it. Now this cake is all sculpted, so I can now start adding color to it. And I'll be doing this by using edible paint. I'm adding a diluter to it to get it to a good consistency where I can start painting with it. So I'm starting with his skin tone first, then working on his hair, and then all the other facial features. I'm painting the neck of the shirt red, and I know the rest of his shirt has stripes on it, but it would really be impossible for me to try to recreate that, so I'm just going to keep it white and then paint the rest of the overalls blue. And to add a little more detail to the face, I'm using petal dust to create some dimension. This is really going to add those shadows, and this really makes this character pop. And here it is. This is the Chucky Cake from the movie Child's Play complete. This was a really tough cake to make, but I had a lot of fun working on the details. It's my favorite part whenever I'm working on a sculpted cake. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. Make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel and comment below any other cakes that you want to see me make. And until then, I'll see y'all in the next video. Focus. Focus on me, not the pumpkin. So this was a real... It want to focus on that pumpkin so bad. Oh my gosh.